snow drifted in slow, deliberate spirals over the small Montana depot, softening the hard edges of the world. The winter morning was pale and unkind, a mirror to the woman who stepped down from the train. Eleanor Wade carried a single suitcase, its leather cracked and scarred from too many miles. Her gloved hands trembled as she clutched it close, though it was not the cold that made her shake. It was the look in the man's eyes who had come to meet her. Silas Boone, the rancher she had crossed half a continent to marry, stood in his long coat, hat pulled low, eyes narrowing with disappointment. He had expected someone younger, perhaps softer, untouched by the kind of grief that lined Eleanor's face. When he spoke, his voice was blunt, shaped by years of wind and solitude. "You're not what the letter said." Eleanor held her breath, trying to steady the tremor in her chest. "The letter said you needed a wife." He shifted, jaw tightening. "A wife, yes. Not a woman halfway to 40. His words fell like stones into snow. The station grew quieter. Passengers turned away out of politeness, but their glances lingered. The wind howled between them, carrying away any pretense of mercy. Silas tipped his hat, muttered something about a refund, and walked toward the general store, leaving her standing alone among the drifting flakes. The train hissed as it pulled away, as if mocking her for stepping off it in the first place. Eleanor remained still until her vision blurred. Not with tears, those had been shed long ago, but with the weight of understanding. There was no husband waiting, no home, no second chance. She was simply sent back before ever arriving. When she finally moved, it was slow, deliberate. Her boots sank into the snow, her steps leading her toward the edge of town where the lights of cabins glowed faintly through the storm. Each window she passed was a scene of warmth, a family laughing, a couple beside a fire, and each one reminded her of how far she stood from belonging. The town was small, its gossip large. By nightfall, Clara Finch, the postmistress, already knew the tale. The old bride from back east turned away at the depot. Her tongue would carry that story through every parlor by dawn. Eleanor reached the livery stable, seeking a place to wait out the storm. The stable boy hesitated when she asked for a cot. "Ain't got one, ma'am. You might try the saloon. They got rooms upstairs." She smiled faintly. "I doubt the saloon keeps a place for women who've lost their purpose." She walked away before he could answer. Snow thickened, swallowing her in white silence. Her coat was thin, her breath shallow, but pride kept her from knocking on doors. She had crossed the country to be someone's wife. She would not beg to be someone's burden. By the time she reached the last lamp at the edge of town, her strength began to fade. She stopped, setting her suitcase down, watching the snow gather on its surface like the slow burial of her past. Somewhere in the distance, a horse approached, its hooves muffled, steady. The rider emerged through the curtain of white, a tall man with a broad-shouldered coat and a scarf pulled high around his face. When he dismounted, the snow shifted around him as if making room. He took off his hat, revealing eyes the color of riverstone, steady, unhurried. "You'll freeze out here," he said. Eleanor lifted her chin. "I've nowhere else to go." The man studied her for a moment, the silence between them filling with wind. "Then you best not stand still." He removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders before she could refuse. The warmth startled her, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and pine. "I can't take this," she murmured. "Can't see how it's doing me much good if you freeze to death," he said simply. "Name's Jonas Callahan." She hesitated before answering. "Eleanor Wade." Jonas nodded once, like a man who understood more than he asked. He led her toward the general store, where a fire burned in a barrel out front. The two stood beside it, their faces flickering in the orange light. She watched him from the corner of her eye. His stillness, the quiet way he breathed, as though speaking too much might break something sacred. When he finally spoke again, it was soft. "You waiting for someone?" "I was." He didn't ask what happened. He only looked out toward the tracks, the snow covering the steel until it disappeared. "Trains don't wait for much in this country," he said, voice low. The town clock struck 8. Eleanor realized she hadn't eaten since morning. Jonas noticed the way she shifted, the faint tremor of exhaustion. "I got a barn up the ridge," he said. "Not much, but it's warm. If you want, you can stay till the weather clears." Her pride fought the offer. "I don't want charity." He gave a half smile, more tired than amused. "Ain't charity. Just seems wrong to let the wind win." Something in his tone, gentle, steady, broke through her hesitation. She followed him up the ridge, snow crunching beneath their boots. His horse trailed behind, steam curling from its nostrils. The night was silent except for the wind and the occasional creak of frozen branches. When they reached the ranch, the barn's lantern glowed faintly through frost-covered glass. Inside it was warmer, filled with the smell of hay and horses. Jonas showed her a small loft above the stalls. "There's blankets and coffee on the stove," he said. "You'll find quiet here." She looked around at the rough walls, the gentle sounds of the animals, the rhythm of his voice, steady, without pity. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan, Jonas," he corrected softly. Then he tipped his hat and left her to the stillness. That night, as she lay beneath the heavy quilt, the storm howled outside. But she felt the faint heartbeat of warmth returning to her limbs. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was survival. She whispered into the darkness, "You're still here," as though reminding herself she had not disappeared completely. By morning, the world was glassed over in ice. Eleanor woke to the sound of footsteps below, the creak of boards, the low hum of a man feeding animals. She descended the ladder, half expecting him to ask her to leave, but Jonas only looked up, nodded once, and handed her a mug of coffee. "Cold bites hard today," he said. "I've known worse." He studied her face, how her eyes carried the faint glimmer of something unbroken. "You've known too much of worse, I reckon." She didn't answer. Instead, she began to help with the chores wordlessly. She swept the floor, brushed the horses, mended a torn saddle strap. Her movements were deliberate, precise. Proof that she was still capable of being needed. Jonas didn't stop her. He let her work beside him in silence. Days passed. The town below whispered. Clara Finch told Reverend Burke that Jonas Callahan had taken in the old bride out of pity. The Reverend, kind but cautious, rode up the hill to speak with him. "A man's good name is a fragile thing in a small town," he warned gently. Jonas looked out across the snowfields, his breath turning to mist. "A good name won't keep anyone warm." The Reverend sighed, left without another word. In the barn, Eleanor overheard none of this. She was kneeling beside a foal, stroking its trembling legs as it learned to stand. Her hands were patient, her voice soft. The creature leaned into her touch, trusting her completely. Jonas watched from the doorway, feeling something stir that he hadn't felt in years. An ache, not of loneliness, but of recognition. Each day unfolded quietly. Eleanor mended linens, cooked small meals, repaired what was broken. Her presence filled the empty ranch not with sound, but with life. Jonas began to notice small things. The way she hummed when she worked. How she always left an extra cup of coffee by his tools without a word. One evening, after tending the horses, he lingered by the barn door. Eleanor sat near the lantern, stitching by its dim glow. Her hair had loosened from its pins, silver strands catching the light like frost. For a moment, time slowed. He saw not the woman the town pitied, but a soul who had weathered storms without breaking. "You remind me," he said quietly, "what quiet looks like." She looked up, startled by the gentleness in his voice. "And what does quiet look like, Mr. Callahan?" He smiled faintly, like someone who's done fightin' with the world. A silence passed, comfortable, weighty. Outside, snow fell in soft sheets, wrapping the ranch in stillness. Eleanor's eyes lowered again to her stitching, but her lips curved just slightly. Later that night, she stood by the window of the loft, watching moonlight silver the fields. Jonas was outside, closing the gate, his silhouette moving slow, deliberate, like a man who had learned to live with ghosts. The narrator's voice seemed to rise from the wind itself, as if the story were being remembered rather than told. Sometimes, the heart sent away finds its home in a place that never asked for it, and sometimes, kindness doesn't come dressed in promises, but in the silence of a stranger's coat laid across your shoulders. Eleanor's eyes closed. She felt, for the first time in years, something like belonging. Fragile, uncertain, but real. The snow outside whispered against the windowpane, promising nothing except another dawn. And somewhere beneath that quiet, something unseen began to take root. When winter began to lose its hold, the snow thawed in soft ribbons along the fence lines, and the air tasted faintly of rain. The world felt hesitant, as if spring itself wasn't sure it had the right to return. Eleanor rose early each morning, her hands red from cold water and chores, her hair tied back with a strip of faded cloth. The quiet between her and Jonas had grown into a kind of understanding. They spoke little, yet their silences carried weight. Unspoken gratitude, shared endurance, a mutual gentleness that had no name. In town, tongues wagged like shutters in wind. Clara Finch said the old bride was still living up at Callahan's ranch, like a ghost who won't take the hint. The men in the saloon laughed when Jonas's name came up, claiming he'd taken her in because no one else would. Even the Reverend, though kinder than most, looked uneasy when their names were mentioned together. A woman without a husband and a man who'd buried his, such a pairing stirred stories. But gossip never reached the ridge quickly, and when it did, Jonas barely lifted an eyebrow. Eleanor pretended not to hear, yet the words hung in her like thorns, small and unyielding. One morning she found a folded note left at the gate. The handwriting was unfamiliar but sharp. A good woman knows when to leave. She stared at it a long time before burning it in the stove. She told Jonas nothing. The days lengthened. Snow turned to mud, mud to grass. She began tending the small garden near the barn, coaxing color from the cold earth. Jonas often worked nearby, repairing fences or oiling saddles, the two of them moving in companionable rhythm. Sometimes, when their eyes met, something passed between them, something fragile but steady, like the first crocus breaking through frost. Then, one afternoon, the sound of hooves broke the calm. A rider approached, kicking up dust where there had been snow. Jonas stepped out to meet him, his shoulders stiffening when he saw who it was. Silas Boone, the man who had sent Eleanor back before she could even begin. Silas looked older, broader, with arrogance thick as tobacco smoke. "Heard you've been harboring what's mine," he said, voice dripping with smugness. Jonas's eyes narrowed. "She ain't yours, Boone. You made that clear enough." Silas smirked, dismounting. "Word around town says she's still living under your roof. Folks got ideas. Ain't right. A woman with no husband taking up space on a man's land." Eleanor stood in the doorway, pale but composed. Her heart thudded against her ribs, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "You lost the right to call me yours the day you turned your back, Silas Boone." Silas turned toward her, his tone mocking. "You were a mistake, Eleanor. A letter written out of loneliness. I wanted a wife, not a memory." Jonas stepped between them, his voice even low. "You best ride on. Storms may be gone, but I don't take kindly to poison lingering on my ground." For a moment the air thickened. Silas laughed, mounting again, his words parting the stillness. "Suit yourself, Callahan, but folks'll talk. Always do." He rode off, leaving a wake of dust and contempt. Jonas exhaled slowly. Eleanor's eyes were bright, not with tears, but with something harder. Resolve, maybe pride. "He's right about one thing," she said softly. "People will talk." "Let 'em," Jonas replied. "They'll find someone else soon enough." That night silence returned to the ranch, but not the calm kind. Eleanor couldn't sleep. The old ache of rejection pulsed through her veins again, sharper for having once been dulled. The note at the gate, Silas's sneer, the town's whispers, all of it pressed on her like frost creeping through cracks in glass. She rose before dawn, packed her few things, and set them beside the door. She wrote a note on the table in careful script. "You've done enough kindness, Jonas. I won't have your name tied to my shame." She left quietly, walking into the pale morning. The air was brittle with cold, a deceptive spring. The road curved down toward the valley, winding through gray fields still recovering from winter's hold. Her boots left faint impressions in thawing earth. Halfway down the ridge, the wind shifted, bringing with it the smell of snow. The sky darkened. The storm came suddenly, fierce and blinding. The same winter that had spared her once now seemed intent on testing her resolve. She pulled her shawl tighter, but the gusts tore at it, freezing her breath. The road vanished under white. Still she pressed on, driven not by hope but by shame. She would rather disappear in snow than face pity again. At the ranch, Jonas discovered the note when the wind rattled the door open. He read it once, then again, jaw tightening. Without hesitation he grabbed his coat, saddled his horse, and rode into the storm. The world was white chaos. He could barely see the trail, but he knew where she'd go. The long road down to town, the one she'd walked when he first found her. He called her name, voice tearing against the wind. Nothing answered but the storm. Then, through the blur of snow, he saw movement. A shape stumbling forward, shawl torn, suitcase half buried. He spurred his horse and reached her just as she fell. "Eleanor!" His voice cracked like thunder. He dismounted, wrapped his arms around her trembling frame. "You'll die out here." She tried to speak, her lips blue. "You don't owe me this, Jonas. You've done enough." He held her tighter, his breath ragged, snow collecting in his hair. "Then be mine, Eleanor." The words weren't loud, but they carried through the storm like a vow. Not born of pity, not of rescue, of choice. The blizzard raged, yet for a heartbeat the world went still. She looked up at him through the veil of snow, and in her eyes flickered disbelief, then warmth. He lifted her onto the horse, wrapped her in his coat, and rode back toward the ranch, his arm firm around her waist. The wind fought him all the way, but he did not slow. By the time they reached home, she had gone limp from exhaustion. He carried her inside, laid her near the fire, stripped off his soaked gloves, and set about reviving her with a quiet desperation. Through the night, he sat beside her, feeding the fire, murmuring words he didn't know he'd kept inside. "You belong here more than I ever did," he said once, his rough hand brushing her forehead. "Don't you see? You gave this place breath again." When morning came, light spilled across the floor like forgiveness. Eleanor stirred, her lashes trembling. Her eyes opened to find him there, slumped in a chair, asleep, hat in his lap. She studied the lines on his face, the tenderness etched into them. For the first time in years, she felt safe. "Jonas," she whispered. He woke instantly, eyes softening when he saw her awake. "You stayed," she said faintly. "I wasn't about to let the wind win." The faintest smile curved her lips. She reached out, fingers brushing his hand. "Then I won't either." Days passed, and the thaw came in earnest. The land began to bloom again, hesitant but determined. Eleanor found herself humming as she worked, laughter sometimes slipping through unguarded moments. Jonas, ever quiet, would glance at her with something like awe, as if afraid that sound might break the spell. The town's whispers softened over time. Clara Finch began leaving bread by the gate. The Reverend brought supplies. No one asked questions. Perhaps kindness spreads the way gossip does, faster than anyone expects, once it finds air. Spring deepened. On the evening of the Easter social, Jonas stood by the door in a clean shirt, nervous as a boy. "Reckon we ought to show them we're still alive," he said. Eleanor hesitated, smoothing the wrinkles from her faded dress. "You think they'll welcome us?" He smiled gently. "Don't matter much if they don't." At the town hall, music floated through the lantern-lit air. Conversations paused when they entered, but only for a moment. Jonas offered his hand. She took it. Together they moved across the floor, slow, deliberate, unhurried. The room seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them beneath a string of golden light. Her old wedding dress, mended and simple, caught the glow as they turned. He didn't speak, and neither did she. The dance was enough. Their movements told everything words could not. The ache of years gone, the quiet joy of finding peace at last. In the corner, Silas Boone stood watching, his expression unreadable. Perhaps regret lived there, or envy, or something quieter. He turned away before the song ended. When the music faded, Jonas and Eleanor stepped outside. The air was cool, the sky silvered with stars. The town's laughter drifted behind them, muffled by distance. They walked the dirt road back toward the ridge, their shadows merging in the moonlight. At the crest, Jonas stopped, gazing over the dark fields. "Never thought I'd get a second spring," he said. Eleanor slipped her arm through his. "Sometimes the second one feels more like the first." They stood in silence, the night wide and forgiving around them. The wind that once cut now carried only softness. Her head rested lightly on his shoulder. His thumb brushed the back of her hand, a gesture small but eternal. In the distance, the barn lantern flickered, guiding them home. And if you listened close enough, you might hear an old voice narrating from the past, the tone thick with memory and wonder. She came across 1,000 miles of cold to be someone's wife, and the world turned her away. But the heart has a way of finding its own shelter. Sometimes love isn't found in youth or promise. It's born in the quiet grace of being seen after everyone else stops looking. The camera of the mind pulls back, the ranch glowing with lamplight, smoke curling into the star-filled sky, the two figures walking hand in hand through the gentle thaw. "If you've ever been told your time has passed," the old voice continues, "remember her. The world may send you back, but someone, somewhere, is waiting to say, 'Then be mine.'" And with that final whisper, the image fades to black. Subscribe for more Wild West tales.